Kia ora, nau mai haramai ki tēnei session. Ko Waiaho, he uri o Ngāti Awa, ko Maarama Davis tuku ingoa, and I work here at Te Poari Tae Tinana o Aotearoa, the Physiotherapy Board of New Zealand, and I work as a professional advisor here, which means I'm a physiotherapist. Kia ora.
Kia ora anō. He uri ahau no Ngāti Rangi, Ngāti Parau, me Ngāti Rangi Nui, no Putaru ahau, ko Witana Petley tōku ingoa, ngari ko tana ahau, tēnei te mihi ki a koutou. I am tana, we're a lot of pōtai, but one of them is being the tumuaki o Tae Ora Tinana, which I'm here to be a part of the conversation in that pōtai today. Kia ora.
Kia ora. So we're going to start the session off today going a little bit deeper in terms of what we discussed in that first video. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to talk through the points that we're going to go through, and then we will go through them. So we're going to look at the differences between Te Tiriti o Waitangi and the Treaty of Waitangi, how it relates to Hauora Māori, and what does this mean working here as a physiotherapist in Aotearoa, and then going down further, having a deeper look at he kawa whakaruru hau a matatai Māori, as well as our cultural competence standard.
Kia ora.
So starting off, I'd like to ask you, Witana, because you explained it really well when we were talking earlier, about what are the differences within the articles of Te Tiriti o Waitangi and the Treaty of Waitangi, and then also making, we'll just start off there, looking at the differences and having a little bit of a conversation about how do we use it, utilise it as physiotherapists here in Aotearoa.
Yeah. Kia ora. The key differences for both of the articles, both of the different articles, Te Tiriti o Waitangi and the treaty, one written in English, other one written in Te Reo Māori. Now, one of the other interesting points about that is that the Te Reo Māori version doesn't directly translate over to what the English one does. And so what's happened is it's raised just a bit of ambiguity, I guess, between the articles, and the key intentions for them kind of get a little bit mixed up. So it's important to know what Te Tiriti o Waitangi is, because there's some clear things that 500 chiefs signed, and then the English one where less chiefs signed it, and it's just created a mishmash of interpretations.
And if we think of it in those times that the treaty was signed and Te Tiriti o Waitangi was signed, is that some of the words were transliterations, and it was a one-word explanation rather than in Te Reo Māori. One word can mean like a sentence in Te Reo Pākehā. And that's also made it challenging in terms of what was being signed, what was thought was being signed, and how it was going to be made into a reality. And then we see the differences and the raru that has fallen from this. Yeah,
well, the whakaaro around, the layout of Te Tiriti o Waitangi and the Treaty of Waitangi, they're usually separated into 3 articles. More recently, we kind of acknowledge that there's been a 4th article as well, and so there's specific differences in between the English and Te Reo Māori version of those ones. In the first article, there was the introduction of ka wanatanga, and there's a lot of pūrākau, a lot of stories around what that actually meant in, or what the intention of creating that word was. What a lot of our Reo Māori translators can kind of see, it's talking about governance. So the Te Reo Māori version was promising the Crown governance over everything that falls outside of Te Ao Māori, which is the subjects from Britain who have come over, and then also any international interests or any purchased land from Te Ao Māori. They can govern over that. The English version specifically kind of talks about ceding sovereignty, which means that all the rights to everything within Te Ao Māori are now passed over to the Crown. And so there's a big difference between those two.
And I think in terms of, again, going back into the intention of both the treaties, and it was for mutual benefit. And it was looking at it from the perspective like we spoke of before, is that the tauiwi, the non-Māori, were actually the minority. So they came from a different power dynamic, and there was that shift. So that's a nice segue into what actually was the intention was quite different to the outcome.
Yeah.
So it's just remembering it was done with the greatest of intent, I think, on both sides initially, and then perhaps it's been, we know it's not perhaps, it has been changed.
Yeah, and you can definitely see a lot of history on from that signing. That hasn't been necessarily too positive from a Māori group or Te Ao Māori point of view. One of the other things, like an interesting kōrero I heard about kāwanatanga, is that that translation was introduced overnight when they translated. So they translated the Te Reo Māori version to English, the English version to Te Reo Māori overnight, and so some of the words didn't necessarily line up too well. But the kāwanatanga, or what a kāwana was actually relatively quite well known within Te Ao Māori, because we knew what a governor was. There were some chiefs who went over to Sydney to meet the governor. Hey, what's your tikanga for your guys' rōpū? And then bring it back to share amongst the rest of ngā hapu Māori. And so that kāwanatanga conversation is also a little bit unclear. Like, there's some things that we feel like some whakaaro in the past and saying that Māori didn't know what they were signing, but to say that also kind of puts us saying that our chiefs from way back in the day weren't aware, we're just going to sign a word that they didn't know about, but they were understanding what a governor was, and the actions of a governor were to oversee non-Māori.
Kia ora.
Yeah.
So moving on to Article 2, Māori tino rangatiratanga. So again, I'm really enjoying your kōrero and listening to what you're saying. Do you want to talk us through the differences between the two, Te Tiriti or Waitangi and the treaty?
Yeah, well, the Te Tiriti or Waitangi version introduced tino rangatiratanga, which is known to translate into the highest form of chieftainship. And when we break down rangatiratanga, ranga kind of meaning weaving and tira meaning a particular group of people. Specifically, rangatiratanga relates to being able to weave or connect everything. Now, in the English version, it was Māori were guaranteed exclusive and undisturbed possession of their lands and estates and forests as an owned thing. Now, tino rangatiratanga relates to not necessarily ownership, but kaitiakitanga and relationship with all of those sources and tongue and treasures and everything that falls under Te Ao Māori. And the English side, it turned them into possessions, which didn't necessarily have the same...
it's ownership.
Yeah.
So it changed it. It's looking at it from an individual ownership perspective.
Yeah, it's ownership versus relationship in that particular kōrero.
Beautiful. Loving it. So looking at Article 3, we were just having a conversation before, is this, it's the actual title is The Same Rights and Privileges of Non-Māori to Māori, and this is one that is okay.
Yeah, pretty much understood on both sides. I guess the details of what that citizenship under the Crown looked like may have been a little bit grey, but they were assured citizenship and the rights of citizens under the Crown.
Which is looking at our equity. And again, if we're moving down and through the verbal Article 4 that was signed or agreed to.
Yeah. Well, just before the chiefs started signing on the signing of Waitangi, there was an oral address, because the Crown, I can't remember the specific person, but there was a request to make sure that there was freedom of religious expression for all faiths under the Crown and under Te Tiriti. And so that was an oral address that was delivered prior to signing, and in a Te Ao Māori point of view, our oral processes trump whatever's kind of written. And so that's an interesting little piece. So we call that the fourth article, even though it's verbal, but in the Te Ao Māori worldview, that is as vitally important as what was written.
Kia ora mōtira. The interesting, many interesting points actually, Witana, that you've brought to the table today. And part of the points I'd like to just really tease out a little bit more is the importance of the kōrero, the oral. And within Māori, it's the value of kōrero, it's the value of kupu, and what that means. It wasn't written in those days, and even if you read some of the way Māori write contemporarily, it's quite a beautiful explanation rather than a one-word fact.
Yeah, and it's a very exciting thing, because a lot of really awesome mātauranga or knowledge in Te Ao Māori can really only be accessed through an oral address. We're an oratory culture. Our whole history has been passed down through word of mouth, waiata, kōrero, mō tia, and all of the valuable lessons that we kind of carried through the centuries came through oratory. And so that's why we recognise that fourth article as, if not more important than the written.
So we've discussed the Te Tiriti o Waitangi and the Treaty of Waitangi, the differences and the different meanings from those different spaces that they've come from, and which lens is that you're looking through. So following on through there, so it segues really, really nicely into Hauora Māori. And what does that mean for us here in Aotearoa? And also what does that mean for us as physiotherapists working in Aotearoa?
Yeah. Well, in the first video we spoke about Hauora Māori being that holistic view of health, and specifically viewing what that holistic view of health looks like from a Māori point of view, and then also looking in that Te Tiriti o Waitangi conversation, how those relationships are vitally important. The tinoranga tiratanga weaving together those relationships, and now we get an additional layer of why Hauora Māori is specifically viewed from Te Ao Māori. Now, some of the things that we see in the Hauora Māori space at the moment, especially in physiotherapy, is we see a lot of our therapists utilising Te Reo Māori, really trying to understand where people are coming from, utilising pepeha mihi as well, but trying to find ways to see where those connections are for our whānau who are coming through.
And I think that you're right in saying that so many physiotherapists, we're doing it from the right place, the right intention. However, it's not making that presumption if you look a certain way that you understand where you are from, you understand your language, be it Te Reo Māori or Te Reo Pākehā. And it's us as physiotherapists being able to read the body language and follow the lead of our kiritaki. So not popping what we think you should be doing, rather than waiting for the response and that signal, really, the permission to actually, let's converse this way, or I'm interested. We had a really neat talk earlier, and it was about when someone comes into our space, it's almost like our house rules. So we think in our own minds that we have that power and we can control this. And we were thinking slightly outside the circle and going, if I go into someone else's space, how do I react? And that's how I think we should be contemplating how we work as physiotherapists and reading those signs.
Yeah, and I feel like we are really, across the health board, we're really good at understanding and seeing those signals when we are, say, a community physio. If we're walking into someone's house, we know that there's going to be differences, and just being aware and being responsive, like taking the lead from our patients that are coming through, and then because that kind of relates or shows that relationship between this particular person and the environment that they're in.
I'd like to tease through a little bit more, because you mentioned it a moment ago, and what's your thoughts on pepeha for Māori, not for Māori, but pepeha and Māori versus I don't identify Māori, and where does that work in terms of good intention?
Oh, he rawe tērā whakaaro. To answer that, one of the things that we have to also explore is what's underneath that. So with pepeha and the structures of them, one of the things that we've kind of realised I've seen over time is like people have a specific list, and there's very clear reasons for that. But from a Te Ao Māori point of view, one of the values that kind of underpin that is this concept of whanaungatanga, which from a Te Ao Māori point of view is the strength of your relationships to the things around you, and understanding your whakapapa that you can lay out in your PPH allows others who you are addressing to know which rights and responsibilities you have to this particular area, to this particular group of people. And so it wasn't necessarily like to show off how much you knew, but it's for everyone who's listening to connect to certain parts. Whanaungatanga, developing those strengths and being clear on those strengths of relationships. And so when it comes to PPH for Te Ao Māori, we also speak about it like, if we're talking about our maunga, our awa, we're talking about it like we are specifically descended from them, like they're our family members. And that becomes from the worldview, that collective worldview, that we're related to everything.
Yeah, and it's interesting if you think of, with PPH, where you are identified at the end, because it's about the collective, it's not about you, the individual. The interesting thing I've noticed over years is now, in many PPH, and I did it today, is saying what my job title is. That never used to be a thing, because that's individual. You didn't need to sing how sweet you were, but times have changed, and so you need to do that in terms of some of our interactions.
Well, I mean, in the contemporary, like the current society, we're also very professional as well. So when we're going to different workspaces, we're actually taking that same sort of component of whanaungatanga, whether we know it or not. We're trying to connect ourselves to this place and time. Our title, our work role allows us to do that in different contexts. In a traditional Te Ao Māori world, probably the job title wasn't too important, but the recognition of your whakapapa and also the group behind you or supporting you, part of that.
If we just have a discussion, or your thoughts again, is looking at from a perspective of PPH for tauiwi, or our non-Māori.
Yeah.
What do you think is appropriate? Because there are many people out there that are doing it from the right place, but sometimes it comes across as, oh my gosh, this is just awkward and inappropriate.
And terrifying.
Yeah.
So when it comes to PPH being used for our tauiwi whānau, who don't come from Te Ao Māori, the specific wording, like if I had to get nitpicky, the specific wording of, say, ko mauau te maunga, if I'm not from the whānau who whakapapa to mauau, not necessarily correct. Hoi anō, a personal whakaaro of mine is that those are great first stages.
Yes.
But being open and being clear to, maybe it'll be better if you say that you relate to this place, or you grew up under this maunga, not necessarily came from it. And there's a whole bunch of
subtleties, the subtleties.
Yeah, and there's a whole bunch of templates on how we can support, how you can create your own PPH from a Māori point of view and a tauiwi o tangata Te Tiriti point of view.
Yeah. So moving on, in terms of, let's have a look at the essence, like what we're talking about, the essence of why certain things are done in a certain way in Te Ao Māori, is thinking, how does that relate to, part of what we were talking about before, of starting off with an introduction, say if we're in the space of a clinic. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, models that we kind of use in teaching and for Haora Māori is the hui process by Dr. Cameron Lacey and a lot of whānau from Mihi, which lays out 4 particular stages of mihi whakawhanaungatanga, kaupapa, and poroaki, whakamutinga, depending on which is more appropriate. Hoi anō, that stage sort of process is a reflection of an actual hui going on to a marae. But when we use it in the clinical setting, sometimes we still keep that stage process, like where do we fit whakawhanaungatanga in? Whakawhanaungatanga being building those connections, building the strength of those connections, and reflecting that core value of whanaungatanga. And then going into the kaupapa, which is all of our clinical stuff. But at that staged approach is a great step 1, ke hoko whakaaro, The next stage is once you understand what whanaungatanga is, that whakawhanaungatanga thing doesn't necessarily stay in that one or that second step.
Agree. So you can't, I don't think, if you are going to be effective and truly authentic, is picking up the hui process, transplanting it into a different sort of process or situation. If one was to go, like what you're saying, is trying to come or get an essence or the feeling of what you're doing and apply that rather than it becoming a linear tick box exercise.
It's a great introductory tool to how do we use our knowledge of Te Ao Māori and how do we utilise our understanding of how whanaungatanga works in our clinical spaces. For whānau who come from non-Māori backgrounds, it is a great first step. But once you understand what that whanaungatanga part is, and the clear reason why we mihi share information and we close up, because all of that is tikanga within Te Ao Māori that's universal.
And if you think of also how we relate as physiotherapists, I'm not going to pop ethnic identifiers on, you're actually, if you look at yourself and look at yourself critically, you might be doing this anyway. And it's highly likely that you'll be doing it, and it's reframing it, putting a different word in, and go, oh, actually, that's what I am doing. So don't be too hard on yourself. Don't stick to this is the steps, but have a look at what you do currently and go, oh, I need to improve, or oh, I am doing it with the essence of it, of what it was meant to be.
Yeah, I'm always a fan of talking about the silent moments in our clinical interactions, where a lot of the physios I know and I've worked with, we fill that gap with talking about the other person. Oh, so like, tell me more about this. That can be considered just, that's just a normal conversation because I'm uncomfortable in the quiet, or a whole bunch of other reasons. But really, like if you look at it at its core, you're recognising whanaungatanga in action. Whakawhanaungatanga is happening whether you think you're doing it or not. If you're talking and relating on that with that person on a personal level.
Awesome. It is pretty awesome. It's really, really exciting. So as we've just discussed before, there's these two that we've spoken about, e kawa whakaruruhau a matatau Māori, as well as the cultural competence standard. But actually, I think this disseminates through all of our standards and how we work as physiotherapists in terms of our practice thresholds, the framework as a whole. But let's just pull it back up and look at this particular standard first, he kawa whakaruruhau a matatau Māori. In terms of the requirements, there are 3 requirements and how you meet those requirements. And this is where we've got that guidance tool that can be really, really useful to see where am I at in terms of my journey, how do I demonstrate these requirements. So just to remind everyone, he kawa whakaruruhau a matatau Māori is there specifically for our Indigenous population, which is the tangata whenua of Aotearoa New Zealand, which is Māori. So this is particularly for our Māori kiritaki. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because we're coming from the perspective of being Māori, but also we also have to be mindful that not all Māori have been brought up into ao Māori or even tirohanga Māori.
Yeah. So, I mean, right off the bat, the he kawa whakaruruhau matatau Māori, focusing on Māori whānau, kiritaki hauora, is a way to just recognise that hauora Māori, that connection to a whole bunch of things in Te Ao Māori, and how, through critical consciousness development, developing cultural safety strategies using the he kawa whakaruruhau matatau Māori tool, all of those processes reflecting on Te Ao Māori in Aotearoa as clinicians who work here will allow us to utilise our physio skills a lot better in Māori communities, or at least create those strong relationships. Now, if we take those same processes and apply them to another culture, in that particular context, those processes still do the same thing. Work our way towards cultural safety. Cultural safety is not whakaaro I heard in the past is cultural safety came from that bicultural policy lens way back in the day. The reason we have to be so specific with he kawa whakaruruha matatau Māori is because we don't want to lay claim to the cultural safety topic. Cultural safety is for everyone. We talk about it specifically for our Māori population in that standard because of the unique position we have in Aotearoa, having our Indigenous community of Te Ao Māori here. But you take those same processes and apply them to other cultures, and your development of and knowledge of other cultures usually works towards the same goal.
And it's really nice, I think it's really nice, is how we can bring this back up, this particular standard of he kawa whakaruruha matatau Māori, and look at it, what are the requirements of Te Tiriti of Waitangi and the Treaty of Waitangi, and the commitment that we have made by signing that treaty. That I'm talking about we as in terms of our ancestors, both from the Crown perspective as well as tangata whenua. So it's bringing that back up, so it's not just linear.
Yep.
And we're constantly thinking about how we are as physiotherapists. But also another point is with culture, as you were identifying, it's not just ethnic culture, it's not just the colour of your skin. Culture can be quite a broad...
It's a big topic.
Broad topic, and hence when we've also spoken about with the Physiotherapy Board, Te Poari Tinana, the standard of the cultural competence standard.
Yeah. Just want to quickly highlight just one point, since mentioning Te Tiriti o Waitangi and the he kawa whakaruruha matatau Māori. So one of the other things that we also have to be very clear on is the reason that we need the standard is because there are health disparities between the Māori population and a lot of other populations. Usually Māori and New Zealand Pākehā are the ones we kind of compare a lot of the times. And so he kawa whakaruruha matatau Māori will give us some skills, again, to show off those clinical skills and work with Māori communities, but to try and reduce those disparities as best we can. We're completely capable of really highlighting our full range of skills in physiotherapy, but really that process of cultural safety development for Māori will allow us to also help close that gap.
And it's looking at it from a perspective of equity. So coming from a place of strength, utilising this to help with equity. So this brings us to the conclusion of this particular presentation, and if you want to know more, or you're really interested and you go, oh my gosh, my appetite's been only half filled, and we've got loads of resources here on the website at Te Poari Tinana. I also want to point you in the direction of resources through Tae Ora Tinana, as well as the other professional associations, and not for physiotherapists, but also there are many resources that aren't physiotherapy specific. It is within our health space, it is within Aotearoa space and context. If you have any questions, or you just want to have a discussion about what's been presented today and given some direction, please don't hesitate. Pick up the phone or email us here at the Physiotherapy Board. Te Poari Tinana o Aotearoa. Kia ora anō.
Kia ora.